And that does it for us.
And we will be back at 4 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. Eastern later tonight here on the Fox News Channel with all the news and a preview of the president's speech at the UN coming up this week. So stay with us like all afternoon.
Absolutely. Right? We'll see you then.
See you later.
Republicans in Congress are getting set to release their plan for a major overhaul of your taxes. Will it line up with what the president is calling for? We're going to speak with two GOP representatives with some different takes on just what tax reform should look like.
Plus, cracking down on North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, President Trump and South Korea's leader vowing new measures to punish the communist regime for its nuclear missile testing.
And a second arrest in the subway terrorist bombing in London. What we are just learning about the 21-year-old man picked up by law enforcement. And welcome to America's News headquarters from Washington. Happy Sunday. I'm Elizabeth Pran.
Great to be with you. Great to be with you at home. I'm Leland Vittert. President Trump using his favorite platform, Twitter, to take aim at Kim Jong-un and North Korea this morning. He also gave the young dictator a new nickname. The tweet comes just days before the president will address the UN General Assembly. The delegation from North Korea will have a front row seat to the president's remarks. Kristen Fisher near Bedminster, New Jersey, where President Trump is spending the weekend getting ready. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Leland. Yeah, a very active morning for President Trump on Twitter. 15 tweets or retweets, all by 9 a.m., but the one that's grabbing the most headlines is the one that contains his apparent new nickname for the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. The tweet reads, quote, "I spoke with President Moon of South Korea last night, asked him how Rocket Man is doing. Long gas lines forming in North Korea, too bad." Now, those long gas lines that he's referring to likely has to do with the latest sanctions just passed by the UN Security Council, which decreases total oil imports into North Korea by 30%. But despite the unanimous condemnation by the Security Council, despite these new tough sanctions, and despite President Trump's promise a few weeks ago to rain down fire and fury on Pyongyang if they continued with these kinds of provocative actions, so far, it's all done nothing. So that prompted his National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, to say on Friday during the briefing that we've run out of options, we've run out of time, we've run out of road to keep kicking the can down. So today, this morning on Fox News Sunday, H.R. McMaster was asked, what exactly did you mean when you said that we had run out of road? Well, here's how he responded.
It really depends on how we see this threat continue to manifest itself and our judgment about how much time we have. And this regime is so close now to threatening the United States and others with a nuclear weapon that we really have to move with a great deal of urgency on sanctions, on diplomacy, and on preparing, if necessary, a military option.
People of Japan!
Maybe running out of diplomatic options, military options still very much alive and well within the Trump administration. So North Korea, it's going to dominate the agenda at the UN General Assembly next week. Over the weekend, President Trump is working on his big speech, which he is expected to deliver on Tuesday. 4 big themes that we can expect to hear: the promotion of peace, prosperity, sovereignty, and accountability. But underscoring all of that is President Trump's continued commitment to keep America's priorities first.
This is not a president who will apologize for America. This is a president who will affirm America's standing in the world against Iran and North Korea. Certainly, when you look at the deterioration of democracy in Venezuela, you see what's happening in Syria. There are so many issues confronting this country, but confronting the world. And he will talk about peace, prosperity, sovereignty, and accountability.
And that last one's a big one, holding other countries accountable to pay their fair share. President Trump is expected to hit that very hard during his speech next week. And, even though it wasn't too long ago that he called the UN incompetent, several changes have been made. He's going to be pushing that next week. And as the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said this morning on another Sunday show, they believe it is a new day at the UN. We'll see, Leland.
Well, it would certainly be a new day if the president used the Rocket Man nickname at the UN during his speech. We'll wait and see on Tuesday. Kristen Fisher, thank you. Liz?
That would be something. President Trump will take the world stage, as you mentioned, at the UN on Tuesday in New York. Meanwhile, lawmakers in Washington are looking for a legislative win, perhaps in tax reform. Pennsylvania Congressman Mike Kelly joins me now on his take on the upcoming tax reform debate. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks for having me on.
You've been very, very vocal. You're a huge proponent of tax cuts, and you've also been supportive of the president really reaching across the aisle, especially this week. Why do you feel that way?
Well, I think the American people have looked at this inability of people on either side of the aisle to work with each other. I think the president was largely elected by Americans, not by Republicans as the main driving force. So I think the president looks at things, I want to get something done. And if I can't get it done purely in the House and in the Senate with Republicans, then I'll reach across the aisle to get the other folks on board to get the votes we need. And I think we look at tax reform as why tax reform now? Because we're losing in a global marketplace. We're watching our people have less take-home pay. And so you say, so what are we going to do about it? Well, we have to do it through tax reform, but mainly pro-growth tax reform. You know, today there'll be a lot of NFL teams playing each other.
Right.
This whole week, they were watching game films of each other to see who was strong, who was weak, where you were strong, where you were weak. Our president is a head coach who looks at the world and says, this is a global challenge. Let's look at where we're falling short. Let's see where others are taking advantage of us, and let's shore that up, and let's make sure that we make America great again. But we have to find a way to reform taxes to have more take-home pay for individuals and let our corporations compete globally.
And obviously, everyone has that bold pro-growth, policy stance. And I'm curious as to how do you get there? Do you get there through the corporate tax cuts? Do you simplify the tax code? What comes first?
Well, I think we were talking. It's all under the same umbrella, right? Because first of all, pro-growth. You have to realize that 90% of our revenue comes from individuals and small businesses, pass-throughs. Only 10% comes from corporates. So you look at the corporate tax reform and you say, let's do something that enables our corporations to be able to stay in the United States and compete globally. And then on the other side of it, for individuals and for small businesses, why don't we take care of those people that provide 90% of the revenue that our country runs on? And I think sometimes we get confused as to what comes first. It's a joint effort to make sure that we're taking care of all the people that supply every single penny that we use to run this wonderful government, or have co-signed onto the debt that's been building on programs that for some reason or other we haven't been able to call back. Too political to touch, but I'm telling you right now, Liz, we are chasing a rabbit we can't catch. We got to get our spending under control. We can build pro-growth tax reform. Look at the game films. Look where we're losing. Look where we have opportunity to gain and get there. And we can get there, both parties, with a president that knows how to lead. It's going to come out of the White House. He's the strongest guy that's been there for so long, in such a long time. But he is a private sector guy who understands that talk is cheap. Get it done, get together, and get to the finish line for the American people. That's what they are looking for. That's what they want. They want to see both sides of the aisle work together in their best interest.
That's kind of what I was going to ask you is, are you going to get to those goals with members of both sides? I mean, certainly you can look at Reagan did it. I mean, presidents have done it. Are you going to do it in this instance when you're really seeing a fractured GOP, but you're also starting to see some fracturing on the Democratic side too? So who will be part of that consensus?
Well, I think if the old saying, if you do the right things for the right reason, good things happen. There's no better time than right now for the American people to watch both Republicans and Democrats work with our president to get to tax reform, pro-growth tax reform, that gives every single American more take-home pay so they can spend their money, their hard-earned money, the way they see fit and not the way a government sees fit. So, look, I know it's going to be difficult because it's so political. At the end of the day, if you can't go to Washington and represent the people that sent you, then for God's sake, stay home next time. If it's about you, you're in the wrong seat. It has to be about the people we represent. We can get there. The greatest country in the world right now is struggling to figure out how do we come up with enough tax revenue to run this wonderful machine. Working together, we get there. You know, this year, with the most revenue we've ever taken in as a country, we're still going to be about $700 billion short of being able to pay our bills without borrowing.
Right.
That's a sin in a country that's so blessed.
Well, and a sin, and you have a lot of people at home, just like you said, listen, they want to see progress, they want to see legislative success. So we wish you the best, sir, in this upcoming fall, and we'll be watching very closely. Thank you for joining us. Leland has more.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. We're all working for the same great people.
All right, let's bring in Arizona Congressman Trent Franks, also working for the same great people, a member of the House Freedom Caucus. Listening to the congressman before, sir, I'm reminded of that line, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon we're talking about real money. You have stood up to the president before. The House Freedom Caucus has been willing to stand up to the president before. It appears as though on tax reform he is willing to sacrifice at least some pretty significant conservative principles to get a deal done. Is that a compromise you're willing to make, as the gentleman before you seem to indicate?
Well, first, let me just express a word of gratitude to the gentleman before me. He has said some things that I thought were pretty powerfully said. And I also was encouraged that he pointed out that this president has sort of the get it done attitude. He has got more business acumen than any president in recent history. So I think he might happen. But it's important to keep in mind that almost no matter what we do to this tax code, we can't do it much harm. This tax code taxes people to death, and then it taxes them again when they die. It's 3 times the size of the Bible, just the statutorial language. And to try to understand it is to risk brain damage.
Congressman, there's no argument that the American tax code needs reform, but how it gets reformed is significant. You just brought up something like the death tax, the estate tax. That is not something the Democrats are going to be on board about repealing. Is that something that you're willing to give up and keep the estate tax to get other things done, or is that a deal breaker for you? At some point, the platitudes have got to stop. We've got to start talking about real policy here.
Well, you know, I'm not much one for platitude. My background's engineering, and I'll have to look at the numbers. But I will say to you, it would be very hard to vote against almost any reform of this tax code, which is my central point. And I've just expressed to you that anything that is pro-growth, I mean, the bottom line, if we're going to help the poor in this country, nothing has helped them more than a tax code that incents productivity and efficiency, and that has dragged more poor people out of poverty than anything else. And I think we're headed in a good direction, and I hope the president's success. I will say to you, sometimes when you try to compromise with people that have an antithetical view of free markets and tax reform and really don't know much about business, there are a lot of inherent dangers in that regard.
Well, that is an important economic truism. As you point out, the past 2 major tax cuts, especially tax cuts for the rich, that being the Kennedy tax cuts and the Reagan tax cuts, did more to help the poor and the middle class than it did to help the rich. But take a listen to what President Trump says he cares about in these tax cuts.
Wealthy Americans are not my priority. My priority are people in the middle class.
All right, so we understand the talking point.
I don't have any problem with that.
Well, I understand you don't have a problem with it, but what drives economic growth is across-the-board tax cuts, especially tax cuts for those in the investing class who are willing to create new jobs. The question's simple: do you trust President Trump to fight for the conservative values that the voters who put you in office and other Republican Freedom Caucus members in office? Do you trust President Trump to be a conservative and fight for those values?
Well, I really do. The challenge will be whether or not we can get this tax code through the rules in the Senate. This Byrd rule makes it pretty difficult. It's probably easier for taxes than it is anything else. But that will be the great challenge. I think the president will get the best tax code he can, given the absolute impossibility at times of getting anything through the Senate.
Well, we appreciate your insight, sir. We know you've stood up to the president in the past when you thought he was wrong.
We stand up for him when we think he's right, and most of the time he's right. And we will try to always stick to principle first and foremost.
Well, that was my next point. You've had no problem calling balls and strikes. We'll look forward to having you back here once we get some real numbers to this, and you can break it down for us, sir.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Congressman. Keep it right here, of course, on Fox News Channel for the latest news from the White House. At the top of the hour, Chris Wallace sitting down with National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, what he has to say about North Korea and the president's upcoming speech to the United Nations. A lot of important stuff in that interview.
Yeah, a lot. Well, another violent night in St. Louis. This was the second straight night of demonstrations in response to the acquittal of a former police officer in the 2011 shooting death of a black man. Will Carr is live on the scene with the very latest. Hi, Will.
Hey there, Liz, and it was another chaotic night, and for the second day in a row, we're seeing a nice part of St. Louis have to clean up. After there were peaceful protests for several hours, a number of people hung around here on Del Mar Boulevard and got into some trouble vandalizing more than 20 businesses here. We're told that one protester came up with a hammer and hit this window in this minority-owned Syrian restaurant, and the business owners here really are having a hard time understanding why this would happen, because so many actually supported the peaceful protest. They were standing out here last night. They were handing out water. They were cheering people on. So they're still trying to wrap their minds around this. And I'm joined now by Sarah, who actually works at this restaurant. Earlier today, we were talking. You said this is a sad morning for this business and this community. Explain that.
It's sad because, you know, most of the people that work here are minorities. Some of us are Syrian refugees that left their home, left destruction. And this is our home away from home, you know, and it's not just that, it's part of the community. And then it gets destroyed by people who claim they want peace. You know?
And there's more protests planned today. What is your message for anybody who's looking for more trouble?
I think we should all be mindful and, you know, get your message out there, but do it peacefully because, I mean, we're paying right now, you know.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. There is supposed to be rain in the forecast today that could impact some of the protests and marches. And as we've got along today, we're hearing the same sounds that we were hearing yesterday in a different part of town, the drilling, the hammering, as they're continuing to try to clean up through this process, Liz.
Very latest. We'll keep an eye on the scene. Will, thank you so much.
A 21-year-old man in West London Saturday, but he has not been charged yet. Meanwhile, the threat level in Britain has been lowered from its highest ranking critical back down to severe.